Good morning, everybody. Welcome to, formerly Jason Mackey's First 10. We're renovating around here. We appreciate your patience. Basically taking the old 5-day-a-week model and turning into once a week, also doing a Thursday reaction video with Adam Bittner. And this one will be available on the Post-Gazette North Shore Drive and YouTube networks every Saturday. The concept here, I do think we need a new name, maybe not First 10. We'll be inviting a variety of guests, some Pittsburgh media members, some former athletes, whole bunch, just talking Pittsburgh sports like we're at a bar, like we're at a coffee shop, a little bit like comedians in cars getting coffee. I don't get to pick out any cars, which stinks, but in any case, it'll be the same sort of idea, talking Pittsburgh sports. And the guy on the, right or left of me, to the side of me, needs no introduction. Guy Junker has worked for B94, KBL, WTAE TV, iHeart, probably a few others in there I'm missing, guys. Now the public address announcer at PNC Park. A sweet retirement gig. He does an awesome job there. Guy, thanks so much for agreeing to do this. How are you?
Oh, I'm great, Jason. For an old guy on a winter morning, this is fun to do. I don't get to expound on things as much as I used to. I need an outlet.
Well, we will expound, my friend. And I think this is fantastic. I'm excited to get into this. Sort of like Sportsbeat, sort of like your, long running show. I mean, your name to me is ubiquitous with sports talk in this city. I've told you this before, but I grew up watching you, listening to you, and this is not that you need me to tell you that, but it's a lot of fun. We'll get into all kinds of stuff there. We want to talk about Steelers to start. Going to get into Guy's path, Baldwin native, Brentwood native, and a Baldwin native on the same podcast. If you can believe that, it's going to be fun. Talk about how Guy got into TV, a lifetime love of baseball, the PA gig now, and little Pirates and Penguins stuff to finish. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder and Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. For over 40 years, Edgar Snyder and Associates has helped injury victims answer that question. Whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with insurance companies, Edgar Snyder and Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle what's next. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. All right, guys, so I looked outside, and the sky is indeed falling, or so it seems. What's going on with this team? And can you give me some perspective on, the negativity and the frustration? Like, it seems like a lot to me. You've seen a lot more than I have. Like, where does this register on your scale?
Well, the current city period, sports-wise, Jason, reminds me sort of like the 1980s. The Steelers were post their fabulous 70 years. Chuck Noll was starting to come under fire a little bit. The drug trials were going on with the Pirates. They weren't any good. The Penguins, by mid-decade, had drafted Lemieux, but it still took them 5 or 6 years to get into playoffs after they got him. And we're kind of in those kind of doldrums right now. Even in recent years, once the Steelers were done for the year, you could look forward to the Penguins, and that's not even possible now. Very unlikely they'll be in the playoffs again. So, and of the teams, I mean, the Steelers still are the most successful. They still make the playoffs almost every year, and they set their own standard, Jason. And their head coach talks about all the time, the standard is the standard. So they can't complain when fans and media are impatient with them not living up to that standard, because they profess it themselves. And not winning any playoff games over this of the longest stretch since they first got in 72 is going to have people upset and disgruntled, even though if you look at most of the league, they're still the last 5 years, they're the only NFL team to win more games than the Vegas over and under when the season started. So
really?
if you look at that, are they overachieving or are they underachieving? They're almost, to me, they're a victim of their own success. They're just good enough not to be great, but they're never bad. The floor is high, but the ceiling is kind of low, if that makes sense.
No, I get you, Guy. And here, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. I think what irritates people the most about where the Steelers are at right now is a lot of what you're talking about, but also it looks like complacency. And I think maybe it dovetails with society a little bit, where we want action, we want to react to things, we want to overreact to things, we want results instantaneously. And like, that's the exact opposite of what the Steelers are doing, right? Like, they're riding it out, they've got patience. And maybe that's indifference, maybe that's being scared. I don't know what it is. Like, we're really getting down in the weeds psychologically, but I just think it's so opposite even what you see throughout the NFL. Team doesn't make the playoffs in 1 year, they're going to fire the guy. It's the complete
Right.
opposite of the approach here. And we look around and say, they should be making the playoffs. Why aren't they firing the guy?
Well, the question I have is, when does patience and stability become a negative? And I think it's getting to that point. In general, I'm not one of these guys that, immediately wants trade this guy, fire this guy. I'm not a knee-jerk kind of guy. And I think patience and stability has served them very well for a long period of time. But I think it's gotten to the point where there has to be, if it's not a head coaching change, some kind of cattle prod needs to go in there and change the way they do things a little bit. There's been a lot made about the amount of assistant coaches that they have. Maybe the game has passed them by a little bit. I watch these playoff games now, and I'm astounded at teams. It used to be when a team went for it on fourth down, at any point in the game, you're on the edge of your seat. It could be fourth and inches.
Now it's routine, guy.
Now it could be 4th and 5 in your own territory in the first quarter, and you're going for it. The game has changed, and I don't think they've quite adapted to that. I don't think it's a mistake, Jason, to try to win with defense in a running game when you don't have a franchise quarterback, which is difficult to get. Their mistakes have been the personnel and the way they've gone about doing that. The changes in offensive coordinator. You look at a Baltimore, it goes out and gets a Derrick Henry. You look at an Eagles, it goes out and gets a Saquon Barkley. Okay, you want to be a running team, that's how you do it. You build up that offensive line. Having the highest paid defense in the league and the lowest paid offense is not working. The Eagles' passing game isn't anything. I look at Joe Burrow. I look at Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. I think those quarterbacks are all a couple of rungs the ladder up higher than Jalen Hurts. But the Eagles have built such a good team around him, especially in the trenches. Yeah. And I think that can be more the way the Steelers try to model themselves than trying to get that franchise quarterback. Although I'll say this too. Everybody sort of has this idea that to get the franchise quarterback that you want, that you have to have a 4-win season or something like that. Kansas City is sitting there with Patrick Mahomes. They were 12-4 the year before they got him because they had the guts to trade around a first-round draft pick away and trade up to get him. And let's face it, his college career was good. I don't think anybody saw – it was like Tom Brady. I don't think any of us saw that NFL success coming out of what their college resume was about. You look at a team like the Eagles. They're going to the Super Bowl again, second time in 3 years, with what I think is a second-tier quarterback, a guy that they drafted in the second round. So there are ways to do it. You don't have to have a 4-win season to get the first quarterback in the draft.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Guy. What you have to do is identify talent in maybe places that people didn't see it. Look at Lamar Jackson. What was he, the 32nd overall pick?
Yeah.
Something like that. Jalen Hurts was in the second round. The Steelers passed on him to take Chase Claypool, for crying out loud. I mean, I understand people being mad because of poor decision-making. I mean, that can be applied to the Penguins and the Pirates, too.
Well, I didn't like the Kenny Pickett pick when it was made. I thought
did it feel forced to you? Why didn't you like it?
He took advantage of being like a 6th-year player in a down ACC that year, used his experience to exploit younger guys, and he was good. But and of course, as soon as I say that, I get accused of being a Pitt hater. You're a Penn State guy, blah, blah. I just didn't care for the pick. I mean, if they took Drew Aller right now, wouldn't like the pick because I'm not sure he's ready to make that next step either. Yeah. But you look at a mistake like that, and that's caused. But I also look. We're talking about patience, and we're talking about stability. They changed a lot last year. People say, "Oh, Art Rooney says one thing, and then they don't do anything." They changed offensive coordinators. They traded a quarterback. They got 2 brand new quarterbacks. They did a lot of things last year. It didn't work out, and I think that is their biggest sin right now. Is some of the mistakes they've made in free agency, in drafting, and in setting up their roster more so than being the same old.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to get into with that guy. I wish we could sit here and talk about the minutia of what to go through at every position. I'll restrict it to this. Quarterback's obviously a huge decision for them. I came out of Art Rooney II's comments thinking more Justin Fields than Russell Wilson. That would be my preference. I just think that if you, one way or another, you're going to find out, if they're not very good, they're going to set themselves up for a very good 2026 draft, at least in terms of where they're picking. I think there's more upside to Justin Fields, or more unknown maybe. And I think you can have him for a better price and use that money to surround him with more. feel free to disagree with that, but where
No,
do you see their
I agree
quarterback
completely,
situation?
Jason. I think, with Mr. Rooney said, he said age is a factor. Well, then that automatically tells me. And, if Russell Wilson would have had, look, their schedule was so brutal for a while there. There's no excuse to lose all 4 of those final games and not even really be competitive. But let's say they won 1 or 2 of those. If he played more the way he did when he first got in the lineup, I might consider bringing him back for a year or 2 till you find that guy. But I think there's more upside with Fields. I mean, his numbers were as good as they've ever been. You talk about surrounding guys with good people. I mean, Jalen Hurts has been a beneficiary of an excellent Eagles team around him. And I think Fields, from the jump from the Bears to here, had a lot better players around him and was coached better. And I think there's potential there. And I also think that the other thing that he said was, Mr. Rooney said, he wants the backup quarterback to be similar to the starter so that if there is an injury or you do want to make a change, they're running basically the same offense. Wilson and Fields are totally different quarterbacks. If you take one out and put another one in, you're going to throw, and I think that was part of why Wilson had a lot of that success early, throwing the moon ball. Pickens was healthy. And then as teams kind of got on a little bit to that, and then Pickens got hurt, that kind of surprise went out the window. So I agree with you. I think they're leaning towards Fields. You look at what's available, I was looking at Pro Football Focus. They listed the top 3 free agent quarterbacks are going to be available.
2 of them are Steelers.
Darnold was one, and the next 2 are the Steelers. So where are you going? You already got the best free agents available. You might as well try to work with one of them.
I know. I also find it a little frustrating, Guy, that so quarterback is the most important position, according to Mr. Rooney. Okay, got that. And what's their solution? They're going to pick one of the 2 things that they already did. What? How are you going to expect the results to be any different if you're just going to recycle what you already did? No, at the same time, I don't disagree with it. I would rather have Justin Fields than Russell Wilson or Sam Darnold. I wouldn't want to spend a ton. My limit would be, I don't know, 25 million, something like that for a Fields contract. And I would want to go get him weapons, wide receiver, address running back, improve whatever, and take my chances. But I did think that was kind of funny. All right, let's get out of this segment on this. I think it's an interesting question. Which Pittsburgh sports team do you think is most likely to win a playoff round? Not like a game, if the Penguins would get in and they win one and then lose the next 4, but which one do you think is most equipped, best equipped right now to actually advance in the postseason?
I still think the Steelers.
Yeah.
I mean, they still get in. Can they get the most disturbing thing to me? Everybody wants to harp on not winning a playoff game in 8-9 years, Jace. To me, it's the collapses in December that are more disturbing. Sure. I mean, they fall apart in December every year. Now, what's the reason for that? I mean, I think that needs to be examined as much as anything. And I think that's as big a reason why they've had these early playoff failures. When you have to go to Buffalo or Kansas City or Baltimore to get through the first round, you take a look. What have the Chiefs won division titles in a row now? I think it's 8 or 9.
Yeah.
Division titles in a row. Look at the teams in that division. Denver, the Chargers, the Raiders. None of them have a winning record over the 8 or 9 years that Kansas City. Back when New England was, I'm not taking away from Kansas City. They still get through the playoffs. They win the Super Bowl. Same thing back in the Patriots when they were on such a long run. The Jets stunk. The Dolphins stunk then. The Bills weren't any good then. And to some extent, when the Steelers were dominating the division, the Bengals weren't any good. The Browns weren't any good. The Ravens have always been a little bit of a thorn. But I think a lot of that, it's not just – a lot of things fall into place schedule-wise, who's in your division. Would Kansas City have won 9 straight division titles if they had Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson in the same division with them? Or Josh Allen, for that matter? Maybe not.
Good point, Guy. Bring up a good point. I'm going to say the Pirates, just to be a bit of a contrarian. And I think that with their young rotation, if they can figure out that offense, they are very much positioned to advance. If you're going to run out Skeens, Jared Jones, maybe Bubba Chandler one day, Mitch Keller, I don't know, some combination, Johan Oviedo, Mike Burrows, they've got some good arms. I don't know about the rest of it, but I like how that sets up.
When you first asked the question, that was my initial reaction to I still thought about their lack of power and their lack of run scoring, because look, we saw with those wild card losses, to Bumgarner and Arrieta. If you get in and could win that wild card, if they got a guy like Skeens going out there, they're going to be the team with that stud. I mean, they had the best staff, I thought, overall in 2014 and 15, but they didn't have that one stud guy to get past the first game.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't totally argue with that. And we'll agree it won't be the Penguins, though.
No, it will not, sadly. State of disrepair. We'll get into them in a little bit and what you can possibly do. Next segment, I want to talk to Guy about his path and some of the stuff he's experienced and his career, being a Baldwin native, getting into TV, radio, all of that stuff. But first, a message from the Bradenton Area Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Embrace the laid-back charm of island life while sinking your toes in the sand and discovering real, authentic Florida in the Bradenton area. Unspoiled beauty and pristine beaches, a vibrant waterfront downtown energized by local arts and culture, fresh Floridian cuisine with a flourish of rich history, and friendly locals ready to welcome you to this preserved paradise on Florida's Gulf Coast. Plan your visit today at BradentonGulfIslands.com.
And welcome back to First 10 or something like that. If you have an idea for a name, shoot me a note, Mackey at post-gazette.com. We will have to rename this thing. Chatting, of course, with Guy Junker. Second segment, going to talk a little bit of career stuff. Guy, I've never asked you this. I know you went to Baldwin, went to Penn State. What got you into TV? Was there a moment or a conversation or a relationship or some experience you had? Like, how did we get here?
Well, I wanted to do what you did. I wanted to be a columnist. I wanted to be
Really?
a writer. And in fact, I take great pride in Mike Clark from Channel 4 always says I was the best writer that he ever worked with in TV, because a lot of TV writing is way different than that. But I took pride in trying to write not just state facts or say who the team was playing, things like that. I had a teacher, her name was Janet Lazewski, who I've been in contact because I've told this story before on DVE. She was very pretty and maybe mid to late 20s. And I had her for a creative writing class in 10th grade. And one day after class, she pulled me aside. She said, Guy, I don't know what your future plans are, but you have a real talent to write here. So she encouraged me. I got on the high school paper staff. And, I had a schoolboy crush on her, this real pretty young teacher. So she sort of pushed me in that direction. And I started writing sports for the high school paper. When I got to Penn State, I was playing ball. I was trying to get on the collegiate staff, which was very difficult to do. That's a good college paper. They wanted me to come in 1 or 2 nights a week and observe for a whole semester before they let me do anything. So I'm already in like my second or third year. And I see a little note on the bulletin board, student radio station forming a sports staff, come to this meeting. I go to the meeting. That Friday night, I covered a Penn State soccer game. Chris Barr scored the winning goal. His dad, Walt Barr, was the coach.
Yep.
I don't know. Matt might have been on that team. He might have been too young still. I interviewed Chris Barr after the game. He couldn't have been nicer. I filed a report, and the bug bit me. I switched to – they didn't have a broadcasting major. I still just majored in journalism. And then I also found out, too, that television paid a little bit better than newspaper guys. So I sort of drifted into the broadcasting situation that way.
That's funny, man. And it's so different because, like, now you've got people like me who've come up on the print and the writing side, but you're dabbling in TV and radio. I wonder why it doesn't work differently. Like, why don't the TV guys have more columns? I don't know.
Well, it's funny. I did a
amalgamation of things.
Not to mention your competitor, but the Tribune Review was doing a TV commercial once, and the premise was it was going to be Stan and I, and someone was going to call in and ask a question. Stan wasn't going to know the answer. I was. And after 2 or 3 times, it's like, how do you know? Stan was supposed to ask me, how do you know all this? And I was supposed to say, I read it in the Trib.
Okay.
Well, Stan was writing for the Post-Gazette at the time, and they got wind of it and said, you can't do a commercial for the Trib. So they got Sam Nover to take that other part. So I finished the commercial, and the public relations person for the Trib said to me, are you a Trib subscriber? I said, no. At the time, I still got the press. And she said, what would it take for you to get a Trib subscription? I said, give me a column. The next day, Dave Ailes calls me, the sports editor, and says, you want to write for it? So I started writing a weekly column.
I got it.
Jason, I did that column for 17 years, and I was paid the exact same in the 17th year as the first year, but I kept doing it. It was sort of a sword hanging over my head every week to do it because I was working 7 days a week, but I like doing it because to me it proved that there are TV guys that can write. And I do think that the Sportsbeat show with me and Stan, I'll take some credit. You're too young to remember. When we first started that, we had difficulty getting writers to come on shows. I mean, there weren't like pardon your what's the show on ESPN with
Pardon the interruption.
Pardon the interruption.
Yeah.
You didn't have shows like that then. I remember when we tried to get guys like Bob Smizik or people from that era on Sportsbeat. If I'm not mistaken, whatever we paid them, some small amount, the newspaper had to sign off on allowing them to appear. And I think the newspaper took a little bit of the money. If I could be wrong.
Whoa, guys, settle down. We don't.
You'd have to ask
here.
You'd have to ask one of the older guys. I'm not sure, but we definitely started getting writers on our show on TV. I got the column. Stan got a column in the Post-Gazette. Then we started doing radio stuff on DVE. And I think that early 90s scene, I think we helped set it up for people. Plus the technology. I mean, you're sitting there right now with a computer and a cell phone and you're doing a podcast. I mean, I used to host the Penn State football story. And I remember one time I was in San Diego for a Steelers game and there was a mistake in the script of it. And I remember they called me. I re-recorded the couple of lines in the script on my cell phone and sent it back from San Diego. And I remember just sitting there in my hotel room thinking, that's hard to believe I just did that. Satellite trucks. And then, we'd go to spring training. We'd have to drive up to the Tropicana Dome there in St. Pete to feed our tapes. And then now you do everything by computer. So I think it's easier for a guy like you now to dabble in all these different things than it was certainly when I was your age.
It's also required. Like you have to, it's such a different, I fantasize about the days of, writers that came before me. I'm not saying it was easier because it wasn't. Like, I understand the technology and I have it very easy. I can carry a laptop with me. But now if you're a beat guy, like you're expected to write 4 stories a day or 2 stories, whatever, you are on 24/7. Whereas, my predecessors, you could file a story. They're like, well, we're done. We went to press. That's it. We're going to the bar. I think about that sometimes. Like, I wonder what it's like to be completely off. Just, you don't have a phone. Nobody can get you. But then you have to wake up in the morning. And if somebody has something that you don't, like that actually stinks. Now, if you break news, you get 5 minutes on Twitter. That's it.
Well, it even got with local TV news, like my last few years at Channel 4. If you were out covering a story, the first thing they wanted you to do was jump on the website. And they wanted you to tweet, put stuff on Facebook, jump on the website and write the story. Shooting the report that was going to appear on the 6 o'clock news became like the 5th thing on which was hard for someone like me after all those years to get that through my head. It's like, no, I got to get the TV story done first. No, get on the computer and get that information out there. And that became kind of strange too. I'd be anchoring. I can remember doing the noon news in Beaver County the day Ronald Reagan was shot. And I knew that I was telling people something they did not know. It got to the point late in my career doing the 6 or 11 o'clock news, and everybody had seen the highlights, seen the scores. Oh, there were already jokes on their cell phones about whatever had happened. And it became more and more difficult to get creative or provide some kind of insight or information that everybody didn't already know. It changed so much.
Yeah. I mean, that's the same thing with our industry too. Teams want to control their narrative and release things themselves. And we grapple with it daily. How do you give readers content that they can connect with? And I think we do a really good job. I'm proud of that, whether it's columns, beat reporting, but man, it's just such a different industry. And we could probably talk about that a whole bunch. Something I've wanted to ask you though, about the Sportsbeat concept. Do you remember where that came from? Who came up with that? When it started? Like what the, sort of, I don't know how those seeds were planted. Good way.
Yeah. Have you heard the name Gil Lucas ever? Do you know that name?
I have not. Maybe I should. I don't.
Gil Lucas started KBL. KBL was basically it stood for cable, KBL. Yeah. And he worked for TCI, and I was working at B94, and he had an office in the basement. And he basically started out, he was selling cable TV door to door for TCI. And people were like, we already get 3 TV stations. We don't need cable. But and as I understood it, they were paying him a lot in TCI stock at the time. Well, the man eventually had a house on the beach at the Gulf of Mexico. So that cable stock went way up.
Yeah.
So I got to be real friendly with him. And I left Channel 4 to go to work for CNN, started a national sports network, SNN. I went to Washington, D.C. and then to New York. I thought it was the big break of my career to be one of their anchors. Well, within a year, they were having financial problems and they pulled the plug on the whole operation. I came back here to Pittsburgh. I was tending bar down on Carson Street. I was living with my dad because I wasn't married yet. The house that I had was being rented. So I'm living with my dad. I'm tending bar. And Gil, we had been pals for years because I was always running some kind of polls. We had a USFL fantasy football league back in the, and I ran it. And he was always in. He was always willing to participate in anything that we did. Well, he calls me one day and says, because back at that time, they would have select Penguin games, select Pirate games, because KDKA still televised a lot of them. And much of the day was like a community bulletin board, Penn Hills Farming having a fish fry Friday, Bell Vernon having their 50th high school reunion, that stuff would just, well, they wanted to start some ancillary programming besides televising the live games. And he said, we're thinking of starting a talk show. Would you be interested in being one of the hosts? I'm like, I'm tending bar. Yeah, I'd be interested in being one of the hosts. But a lot of people obviously associate me and Stan with that show. The first year was me and Bob Pompiani because Stan was still working for Channel 4. And we did the show out of KDKA studios. So Gil kind of started it. And the original producer he was reviled a little bit by those of us work because we killed ourselves for very little money to get that thing off the ground. But he was a great idea guy, but he didn't want to he wanted to work 9 to 5 and be the producer of Sportsbeat. Okay. A guy named George Pryor, God rest his soul. He passed away, but he had some great ideas. The Porch Tour was his idea. The name of the show, Sportsbeat, was his idea. And I still remember the first promotional billboard they did. It was his idea to get all these writers and people on the show, which at the time I'm thinking, this isn't going to happen. The first promotional billboard was Beano Cook, Ron Cook, Gene Collier, me, and Bob Pompiani. I still have a framed picture of it somewhere.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that was the idea of how the whole thing started. Well, make a long story short, within a year, KDKA didn't like the arrangement. They sort of booted us out of the studio. We moved to Channel 11, so Bob could no longer do it with me. Right as that happened, Channel 4 fires Stan, and unbeknownst to them, there was a loophole in his non-compete contract that did not include cable TV. So he didn't have to sit out a year. He immediately jumped in. And I had been his 11 o'clock producer for 6 years. So we were already pretty tight, and it worked well.
That's fantastic. I've never heard that before. That's very good. So when you walk around, do people still say something, Stan, guy, I love the show. Like, how frequently do you hear that, if ever?
Oh, it used to be daily. Since I grew the beard, it's probably more weekly.
Incognito with your winter beard.
Yeah, I could go into a bar now and have a beer, and I don't have 10 people asking me what I think the Steelers' problems are. So I put a little cap on, and but no, I still get a Stan guy, love the show at least once a week, all the time. And people say you probably get tired of hearing that. I said, no, if you said you hated the show, I'd get tired of hearing that. And especially since Stan has passed, any reference to him makes me happy. So
no doubt. No doubt. And well, from the younger generation, people that grew up watching that, I'm sure you have an idea what it means, but it is very cool to, grow up here, watch that, and then meet all of you folks and become friends with all of you. And then all one part of the,
I was impressed when you were the first one on the Penguin beat, man. I was impressed with your knowledge and your work right off the bat. And then, you're the other thing that I've moved around a little bit. The other thing about Pittsburgh media, I think, Jason, is we all get along pretty well.
Yeah.
I've been in other cities traveling on the road where like the ABC sports director doesn't talk to the CBS sports director, or the head columnist of one paper hates the head columnist of another paper. And I remember,
to be fair, we do have our spats. I'm not going to say.
No question. But I think in general, and Adam Lynch, who I loved working with back in the day, big time news anchor in Pittsburgh for years for Channel 11 and Channel 4. He said to me, he called me Junkie. He said, hey, Junkie, the people at the other station doing the same job as you, they're much more closer to you than management here will ever be. And that's the truth. We're all sort of in the same boat, floating the same way, trying to get our job. You're trying to beat the other guy. You're trying to scoop him, sure. But I've always liked the fact that in general, we're all kind of friendly.
I've found myself more open to the friendships or talking to people when I'm not on a beat. I don't know if I was ultra intense on a beat to the point where like I wouldn't read other papers' coverage. I didn't want it to like skew my brain. There would be times in the Pirates press box I would like be so zoned in on what I'm doing. It wasn't like a I don't like you kind of thing. It was like I'm trying to win today, and I didn't always do that. That was just my mindset. Like I got so darn competitive, but it's a little different.
I could see that. And one of the things I liked about working in television was that I was doing something different every day.
Yeah.
I would be jealous.
And a curse.
I'd be jealous of beat. Yeah, right. I'd be jealous of beat guys because they had such an inside track. They had people that trusted them, that would give them scoops and tell them things that they're not going to tell me when I'm there once every 5 days.
Yep.
But I also like the fact that one day I'm covering a high school football championship. One day I'm at Robert Morris basketball practice. One day I'm at Steeler practice. It made for variety. And I think you have a great general knowledge of everything that's going on, but you don't have that real inside stuff. Now, when we were doing the pre and post game show for the Penguins and the Pirates, Stan and we got a lot of breaks and a lot of information. That was almost like being a beat guy because we were doing pre and post game show. We were doing like what Dan Potash does now. Talking Bucks was the baseball show and Hockey Hotline was the hockey show. So, but I could see where being a beat guy, you'd have to be a little more competitive and perhaps standoffish with your colleagues.
Not standoffish, just maybe social. They'd probably look at me like, well, "What's wrong with Mackey today? He's going through it or something." But anyway, I'm not throwing things or yelling at people or a maniac. It's just you have to be a little bit more intense. I think when you're on a beat and you're directly competing with, like, regardless, I'm going to write a column. Benz or Dayon or whomever, like, they're going to write columns. We're all going to write columns. They might have a better idea than me, but whatever. All right. So our last segment, Guy, I want to talk a little Penguins Pirates, get back into, some of the business side, or I guess the current business side. So we'll do that. I want to talk a little bit about Paul Skeens, maybe an under the radar guy who might help the Pirates this season. Short break, and then we'll get there.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.